Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance and watched the stars through the main window. He had been patrolling this part of space for 3 months now, checking on the human colonies that had spread across 12 different star systems. The work was usually boring, just making sure the trade ships were safe and the colonists had what they needed. Today felt different, though, and Jake could not figure out why. The communication officer turned around in her chair and looked worried. "Sir, we are getting a priority message from Earth Command," she said. "It's marked as urgent for all fleet commanders." Jake walked over to the main screen and pressed the button to play the message. Admiral Lisa Harper appeared on screen, and her face looked very serious. "All commanders, we have received first contact with an alien government that calls itself the Galactic Council. They claim to represent 12 different alien species and say they have ruled this part of the galaxy for thousands of years." The message continued, and Jake felt his stomach drop. "The Council has given us an ultimatum. They want humanity to stop expanding to new planets, give up all our outer colonies, and become what they call a tributary species. This means we would have to follow their rules and pay them tribute. We have 30 days to agree, or they will use what they call corrective measures against us." Jake looked around at his crew and saw the same shock on their faces. They had always known that meeting aliens was possible, but nobody expected it to happen like this. The Council was not interested in friendship or trade. They wanted humanity to surrender. The message from Admiral Harper kept playing. "I want all fleet commanders to report to Earth immediately for an emergency meeting. We need to decide how humanity will respond to this threat. Do not engage any alien ships you might encounter. We need time to understand what we are dealing with." Jake turned to his navigation officer. "Set course for Earth maximum speed," he said. The young man nodded and started working on his controls. The ship turned and the stars shifted as they headed toward humanity's home world. During the long trip back to Earth, Jake read everything the Council had sent. The aliens had included detailed information about their fleet strength, their technology, and their military capabilities. They seemed to want humans to understand exactly how powerful they were. The Council had ships that were 3 times larger than anything humans had built, with energy shields that could stop nuclear weapons and weapons that could destroy entire cities from orbit. But what bothered Jake the most was the tone of the message. The aliens wrote like they were talking to children who had misbehaved. They expected humans to be scared and to give up without a fight. The Council had clearly done this before with other species, and they expected the same result with humanity. When Jake arrived at Earth, he went straight to Fleet Command headquarters. The meeting room was full of admirals, generals, and political leaders. President Maria Santos sat at the head of the table, looking calm but determined. Admiral Harper stood at a large screen showing the Council's fleet positions throughout the galaxy. "Ladies and gentlemen," President Santos said, "we are facing the biggest threat in human history. The Galactic Council has made it clear that they see us as inferior beings who should submit to their authority. They have given us 30 days to surrender our freedom." General Bobby Martinez spoke up from across the table. The Council's message included scans of their military strength. They have over 10,000 warships spread across the galaxy, with technology that is clearly more advanced than ours. In a direct fight, we would be outnumbered 100 to 1. Jake listened as the discussion continued. Many of the leaders seemed ready to negotiate with the Council to find some compromise that would avoid war. They talked about diplomatic solutions and finding middle ground. But Jake noticed that Admiral Harper looked angry, and he could guess why. "With respect, Mr. President," Admiral Harper said, standing up. "The Council is not interested in negotiation. They have made their position clear. They see us as a young species that needs to be controlled. They expect us to submit because that is what every other species has done." She pressed a button, and the screen changed to show human colonies throughout space. "We have built something amazing out here. Free human beings living on dozens of worlds, building their own communities, raising their families in safety. The Council wants us to give that up and become their servants." President Santos nodded slowly. "Admiral, what are our options if we refuse their ultimatum?" "War," Admiral Harper said simply. Total war against an enemy that has ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. They have better ships, better weapons, and more experience. But they have one weakness. Which is? Asked General Martinez. They have never fought humans before, Admiral Harper replied. Every species they have conquered in the past has surrendered when faced with overwhelming odds. They expect rational beings to calculate the cost and choose survival over resistance. Jake found himself speaking before he realized it. But humans are not always rational when it comes to freedom. Everyone in the room turned to look at him. President Santos smiled slightly. Explain, Commander. Jake stood up and thought about his words carefully. The Council has sent us their fleet positions, their technology specifications, and their strategic capabilities. They want us to be afraid. But in doing so, they have shown us exactly what we need to defeat. They are fighting the last war against enemies who valued survival over victory. Admiral Harper nodded. The Commander is right. The Council has never faced an enemy that would choose total destruction over surrender. They have never fought a species that has spent centuries perfecting the art of warfare. President Santos looked around the room at all the military leaders. Are you telling me that you think we can win a war against the Galactic Council? No, Madam President, Admiral Harper said. I am telling you that we can make them regret starting one. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then President Santos made her decision. Send a message to the Galactic Council. Tell them that humanity respectfully declines their generous offer. We choose to remain free. Jake smiled as he watched the president give the order that would change everything. The council expected fear, submission, and rational calculation of odds. Instead, they were about to learn that humans had been preparing for this war their entire history even before they knew who they would be fighting. The message went out from Earth to the Galactic Council 3 days later, and Admiral Lisa Harper knew there was no turning back now. While the council members probably expected humanity to spend the remaining 27 days begging for mercy, Harper had different plans. She activated Protocol Omega, a war plan that had been developed over decades but never used. Protocol Omega was not like the military strategies of other species. Most civilizations kept their military and civilian sectors separate, with professional armies fighting limited wars while the general population remained safe. Humans had learned long ago that sometimes survival required everyone to fight. Colonel Danny Wright received his orders at the Mars Colonial Defense Center and immediately understood what they meant. Within 6 hours, every civilian spacecraft in the solar system received new orders. Cargo ships that had been carrying supplies between planets were ordered to report to military stations for modifications. Mining vessels that spent their time digging in asteroid fields were recalled for weapon installations. The transformation happened so quickly that the Council's spy network completely missed it. They had agents watching human military bases and counting warships. But they did not understand that humans could turn their entire civilization into a war machine. When a cargo hauler arrived at Jupiter Station carrying food supplies, the Council agents reported normal civilian activity. They did not know that the same ship would leave 3 days later with nuclear missiles hidden in its cargo bay. Dr. Patricia Lewis ran the most important part of the conversion process from her laboratory on Luna Base. Her team had been working on civilian technology that could be quickly changed for military use. Fusion reactors that powered space stations could be rebuilt into bombs. Mining equipment that broke apart asteroids could be aimed at enemy ships. Even the computer systems that managed trade routes could be reprogrammed to coordinate attack patterns. The Council had made detailed studies of human technology, but they had only looked at military hardware. They saw human warships that were smaller than their own and weapons that seemed less advanced. What they missed was the human ability to improvise and adapt. Every human tool was potentially a weapon, and every civilian facility could become a military target. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Carter coordinated with resistance groups on worlds that the Council controlled. These were human colonies that had been taken over by other alien species in the past, their populations forced to live under foreign rule. The Council thought these people had been pacified, turned into obedient subjects who would never cause trouble. Carter knew better because he understood human nature. The colonists on these occupied worlds had been planning and preparing for years. waiting for the day when Earth would be strong enough to help them. They had hidden weapons, established secret communication networks, and identified key targets in the alien occupation forces. When Carter sent them the activation codes, sleeper cells across dozens of worlds began to wake up. On New Babylon, a mining colony controlled by the Threx Empire, Supervisor Bill Johnson received a coded message disguised as a routine supply request. Within hours, he had contacted 47 other humans working in the alien mining operation. They knew exactly which power generators to sabotage, which communication relays to destroy, and which alien administrators to eliminate. The Council's intelligence services had been monitoring human communications for weeks, looking for signs of military preparation. They intercepted millions of messages between Earth and the colonies, but most of them seemed to be normal civilian traffic. Families talking to each other, businesses placing orders, students sending homework to teachers. The Council's code breakers never realized that hidden in all this normal communication were detailed military orders. Captain Ryan Blake worked from a secret command center buried deep under the Rocky Mountains, coordinating humanity's response to the Council ultimatum. His job was to think like the enemy and predict what they would do. The Council expected humans to negotiate because that was what civilized species did. They would probably send a police fleet to one of the outer colonies, make a show of force, and wait for humanity to surrender. Blake had studied the Council's previous conquests and found the same pattern every time. They would arrive with overwhelming numbers, demonstrate their superior technology, and give the target species one more chance to surrender. Most alien civilizations would see the hopeless odds and give up. The few that tried to fight would quickly realize they could not win and would negotiate for the best terms possible. But Blake had a different plan waiting for them. When the Council fleet arrived at whatever colony they chose to attack, they would find what appeared to be a helpless human settlement with no military defenses. The aliens would land their troops, set up their occupation forces, and declare victory. Then they would learn the first rule of human warfare: the battle does not end until the enemy is completely destroyed. General Bobby Martinez reviewed the mobilization reports from across human space and felt satisfied with the progress. In less than a week, humanity had turned itself into the most dangerous military force the galaxy had ever seen. Not because they had the best technology or the biggest ships, but because they were willing to sacrifice everything for victory. The Council had sent their ultimatum expecting rational creatures to make rational choices. They believed that any intelligent species would choose survival over destruction, cooperation over conflict, peace over war. They had never encountered humans before, and they did not understand that human history was written by people who chose to fight impossible battles rather than live on their knees. While Council members debated humanity's response in their great chambers on distant worlds, human workers loaded weapons onto civilian ships. While alien diplomats discussed the terms of Earth's surrender, human engineers built new kinds of bombs. While Council intelligence officers tried to decode human communications, resistance fighters prepared to turn occupied worlds into battlegrounds. President Maria Santos watched the reports coming in from across human space and knew that there could be no turning back now. Protocol Omega had committed every human being to total war against the Galactic Council. If they lost, humanity would be destroyed or enslaved. If they won, the galaxy would never be the same. The countdown continued toward the Council's deadline, but Admiral Harper was no longer worried about running out of time. She had what she needed: an entire species united in their refusal to surrender. The Council had made one critical error in their calculations about human behavior. They assumed that intelligent beings would always choose the safe path over the dangerous one. They were about to learn that humans had survived and thrived by choosing the most dangerous path of all: freedom at any cost. The Council's police fleet arrived at Proxima Colony exactly on schedule, 30 days after delivering their ultimatum to humanity. Admiral Vexhai of the Threx Empire commanded the expedition from his flagship, a massive vessel that was larger than anything humans had ever built. He expected this to be a simple operation, make a show of force, accept humanity's surrender, and begin the process of integrating Earth into the Council's galactic order. Captain Vincent Hayes piloted the lead scout ship as the Council fleet approached the Proxima system. His sensors showed what appeared to be a completely normal human colony world, with cities, farms, and industrial facilities spread across 3 continents. There were no orbital defense platforms, no military installations, and no signs of resistance. The humans seemed to have simply abandoned any attempt to defend themselves. Vexhai reviewed the intelligence reports from his command center and felt satisfied with what he saw. The colony had a population of nearly 2 million humans, but there were no military forces visible anywhere in the system. A few civilian ships moved between the planet and its orbital stations, but they all appeared to be normal merchant vessels. It looked like humanity had chosen the sensible path and evacuated their military forces, rather than waste them in a hopeless battle. The Council fleet moved into standard occupation formation around the planet. Vexhai had done this dozens of times with other species, and the pattern was always the same. The local government would send a delegation to negotiate surrender terms. The Council would establish administrative control over key facilities, and within a few months the conquered species would be producing tribute for their new masters. Admiral Kara Thompson watched the Council fleet settle into position from her command ship at the edge of the Proxima system. Her vessel was completely invisible to Council sensors, protected by stealth technology that the aliens had never encountered. She could see everything they were doing while remaining hidden in the shadow of the system's outer gas giant. Thompson counted 47 Council warships arranged in a defensive sphere around Proxima Colony. Each ship was 2 or 3 times larger than the biggest human vessel, with energy shields and weapons that could destroy cities from orbit. In a direct battle, her entire fleet would be outgunned and outnumbered by at least 10 to 1, but Admiral Harper had not sent her here to fight a direct battle. The first Council landing parties encountered no resistance as they approached the major cities on Proxima. Captain Hayes led a formation of transport ships down to the capital, city of New Geneva, where they expected to meet with human officials for the formal surrender ceremony. The city appeared completely normal from the air, with people walking the streets and vehicles moving through the traffic patterns. But something felt wrong to Hayes as his transport touched down in the central plaza. The humans on the street were not acting like a conquered population. They were not running away or hiding in their homes. Instead, they seemed to be going about their normal business, almost as if they did not know that an alien fleet had just arrived to occupy their world. Vexhai received reports from his landing teams across the planet. Every major city and industrial facility had been secured without a single shot being fired. The human population seemed cooperative, and local officials were already asking about the procedures for establishing Council administration. It was going exactly as he had expected. What Vexhai did not know was that the humans his troops were meeting were not the original colonists. 2 weeks earlier, Admiral Harper had evacuated the entire population of Proxima Colony to safety in another star system. The people his soldiers were talking to were volunteers from Earth's intelligence services, specially trained operatives whose job was to make the occupation look successful while gathering information about Council procedures. Admiral Thompson checked her chronometer and saw that the Council fleet had been in position for exactly 6 hours. That was long enough for the aliens to feel secure in their victory, long enough for them to stop looking for threats, and long enough for them to group their ships in the tight defensive formation that made them perfect targets. The asteroid had been accelerated for 3 days, pushed by hidden human engines to nearly 10% of light speed. It was not large, only about 50 meters across, but at that velocity it carried more kinetic energy than all the nuclear weapons in human history combined. Council sensors never detected it because it looked exactly like the thousands of other asteroids drifting through the Proxima system. Captain Hayes was reviewing occupation reports in his command center when every alarm on his ship started screaming at once. His tactical officer turned around with a look of complete shock. "Sir, we have multiple high-energy contacts approaching the fleet at relativistic velocities. Impact in 12 seconds. Hayes had no time to give orders or send warnings. The asteroid struck Admiral Vex High's flagship in the exact center of its hull and punched completely through the massive vessel like it was made of paper. The kinetic energy release was so intense that it vaporized everything within a 50-kilometer radius and sent shockwaves through the entire Council formation. Admiral Thompson watched through her sensors as 23 Council warships simply ceased to exist in the span of 3 seconds. The remaining ships scattered in panic, their commanders trying to understand what kind of weapon could destroy their most powerful vessels so completely. That was when the second part of her plan began. Human stealth ships, decloaked throughout. The Proxima system, appearing from behind asteroids, gas giant moons, and empty space where they had been hiding for days. These were not the large warships that the Council expected to face, but small, fast vessels designed for hit-and-run attacks. Each one carried enough firepower to cripple a Council ship, and they attacked with a coordination that the aliens had never experienced. Lieutenant Commander Bill Parker commanded one of the stealth attack craft and watched his targeting computer lock onto a Council destroyer that was trying to escape the system. His ship carried only 4 missiles, but each one was equipped with a nuclear warhead and guidance systems that could track a target across interplanetary distances. He fired all 4 weapons and immediately changed course to avoid return fire. The Council ships were built for battles against enemies that fought with honor and followed the accepted rules of civilized warfare. Their shields could stop direct energy weapons and their armor could absorb conventional explosives, but they were not designed to handle weapons that used pure kinetic force or the concentrated power of nuclear fusion. Human missiles punched through their defenses like they were not even there. Within 30 minutes of the first attack, the Council police fleet had been reduced from 47 ships to 11. The survivors were broadcasting surrender signals and asking for mercy, but Admiral Thompson had her orders. There could be no survivors to report back to the Council about human capabilities, and there could be no witnesses to describe the tactics that had destroyed their fleet. General Bobby Martinez received the confirmation signal from Admiral Thompson and immediately activated the second phase of humanity's response. Across dozens of Council-controlled worlds, human resistance cells began their attacks on alien occupation forces. Power plants exploded, communication centers went dark, and Council administrators found themselves fighting desperate battles against enemies they had thought were completely pacified. The Council had expected humanity's response to be predictable, rational, and limited to conventional military action. Instead, they found themselves facing an enemy that had turned their entire civilization into a weapon and was willing to use tactics that violated every accepted principle of civilized warfare. As the last Council ship in the Proxima system was destroyed, Admiral Thompson sent a simple message back to Earth. The first lesson had been delivered, and the galaxy was about to learn that humans had been preparing for this war their entire history, even before they knew who they would be fighting. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was unlike anything in their 10,000-year history. Representatives from 12 species sat in their great chamber on the capital world of Zentara Prime, and for the first time, they were afraid. The reports coming in from across their territory told a story that none of them wanted to believe. Counselor Vex High of the Threx Empire stood before the assembly, his usually calm demeanor replaced by obvious distress. The police fleet sent to Proxima Colony has been completely destroyed, he announced. 47 ships and over 30,000 crew members were eliminated in less than an hour by an enemy force that appeared to consist of primitive human vessels. The chamber erupted in shocked voices as representatives tried to understand what they were hearing. The Zephyrian delegate raised one of her 4 arms for attention. How is such a thing possible? Our intelligence reports indicated that humanity possessed perhaps 200 military vessels, none larger than our escort-class ships. Vex High activated the holographic display in the center of the chamber, showing the tactical analysis of the battle at Proxima Colony. The humans did not engage us with their official fleet. Instead, they used what appears to be converted civilian vessels, stealth technology we had never encountered, and weapons that violated every accepted principle of civilized warfare. What the display showed made the council members even more uncomfortable. The human attack had not been designed to capture ships or territory, but to completely annihilate every Council vessel in the system. There had been no communication, no demands for surrender, and no attempt to minimize casualties. The humans had simply killed everyone and moved on to their next target. Admiral Lisa Harper coordinated the second phase of humanity's war plan from the UES Constitution, now serving as the mobile command center for all human military operations. Reports flowed in from across Council space as human forces struck at targets the aliens had never thought to defend. Mining stations that supplied raw materials to Council shipyards exploded without warning. Communication relays that connected Council worlds went silent. Supply convoys carrying food and equipment to alien colonies simply disappeared. Captain Michelle Rogers commanded a human task force that had spent 3 days tracking a Council logistics fleet through the outer systems of the Kepler sector. The alien convoy consisted of 12 massive cargo ships, escorted by only 4 warships, because no one had ever attacked Council supply lines before. It was exactly the kind of target that human planners had identified as critical to enemy operations. Rogers watched through her tactical display as her ships moved into attack position around the Council convoy. The enemy vessels were following a predictable route between their supply bases, maintaining perfect formation and broadcasting their positions on standard communication frequencies. They had no idea that human forces had been tracking their movements for weeks. The attack began with long-range missile strikes against the escort vessels, launched from distances that the Council had thought were beyond human weapon range. Rogers had modified her ships to carry larger missiles with extended fuel tanks, trading cargo space for the ability to kill enemies before they could fight back. The Council escorts never had a chance to return fire. With the warships destroyed, Rogers turned her attention to the cargo vessels. These ships carried supplies for Council colonies in 6 different star systems, including food, medical equipment, and industrial machinery. Under the accepted rules of galactic warfare, civilian supply ships were considered non-combatants and should have been allowed to surrender. But Admiral Harper had been very clear about humanity's new approach to warfare. There could be no Council, survivors to report human tactics, no captured supplies to sustain enemy operations, and no mercy for any vessel flying under Council authority. Rogers gave the order to destroy the cargo ships and watched as 12 more vessels joined the growing list of alien losses. The pattern repeated across dozens of star systems as human forces struck at every weak point in the Council's galactic infrastructure. Commander Tony Lewis led raids against communication stations that connected Council worlds. Lieutenant Colonel Danny Wright organized attacks on mining operations that supplied Council shipyards. Captain Jake Morrison destroyed alien research facilities that developed new technology. What terrified the Council most was not just the effectiveness of human attacks, but their systematic nature. The aliens had expected desperate raids and random violence from a species facing extinction. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that had studied their civilization for weaknesses and was methodically destroying their ability to function as a galactic power. The Council's response to human attacks followed their traditional military doctrine, which emphasized overwhelming force and gradual escalation. When human raiders struck at a Council mining station, they would send a larger fleet to protect the next target. When humans destroyed a communication relay, they would install better defenses around similar facilities. But this approach required resources and time that the Council no longer had. Admiral Harper had correctly predicted that the aliens would try to fight the last war, using strategies that had worked against previous enemies. Human forces stayed ahead of Council responses by constantly changing their tactics and targets, never allowing the enemy time to adapt. General Bobby Martinez reviewed the strategic situation from his command center on Earth and felt cautiously optimistic about humanity's chances. In the first month of fighting, human forces had destroyed over 300 Council ships, eliminated dozens of supply bases, and turned 6 occupied worlds into active war zones. The enemy was reacting to human moves instead of implementing their own strategy. But Martinez knew that the Council still had enormous advantages in terms of raw numbers and industrial capacity. If they could overcome their shock at human tactics and organize an effective counterattack, they might still be able to overwhelm humanity through sheer volume of forces. That was why Admiral Harper had authorized the most controversial part of humanity's war plan. When the Council destroyed the human colony at New Denver in retaliation for attacks on their supply lines, they expected the loss of 2 million civilian lives to shock humanity into negotiating for peace. Instead, human forces responded by eliminating 3 Council core worlds in a single coordinated strike. Admiral Thompson led the attack personally, using relativistic kinetic weapons to destroy the planetary capitals of 3 different species. The death toll was over 50 million alien civilians, and the message to the Council was clear. Humanity would match any escalation with greater violence of their own. Dr. Patricia Lewis monitored Council communications from her intelligence center on Luna Base and saw the fear growing in alien leadership. Their latest intercepted messages showed panic among Council representatives as they realized that humanity was not fighting a limited war for better terms. The humans were trying to destroy the Council as a functioning government, and they were succeeding. The aliens had built their entire civilization around the assumption that intelligent species would always choose survival over destruction, negotiation over violence, and rational self-interest over principled resistance. They had never encountered an enemy that would accept massive casualties in order to inflict even greater losses on their opponents. As reports continued to flow in from across Council space, showing more destroyed fleets, more eliminated installations, and more successful human attacks, the alien leadership began to understand that they were not fighting a typical rebellion. They were facing a species that had built its entire culture around the idea that some things were worth dying for, and freedom was at the top of that list. The war was only 2 months old, but already the balance of power in the galaxy was shifting. The Council's authority had been based on their ability to project overwhelming force against any species that challenged them. Now they faced an enemy that seemed immune to intimidation and willing to pay any price for victory. And for the first time in their history, they were not sure they could win. 6 months after the first shot was fired at Proxima Colony, Supreme Counselor Zarthek stood in his private chambers on Zentara Prime and admitted to himself what he had been trying to deny for weeks. The Galactic Council was losing the war against humanity, and losing badly. The latest intelligence reports spread across his desk painted a picture that would have been impossible to imagine a year ago. Human forces now operated freely in over 40 Council star systems. 3 major shipyards had been destroyed, 17 supply bases had been eliminated, and the Council fleet had lost over 2,000 vessels to an enemy that should have been crushed in the first week of fighting. Counselor Vexhai entered the chamber carrying even worse news. The Kepler Defense Force has surrendered to human attackers, he reported. Admiral Morrison accepted their surrender and allowed the survivors to return to Council space with a message for our leadership. Zarthek felt his stomach drop. The Kepler Defense Force had been one of their strongest regional fleets, with over 100 modern warships and experienced commanders. If the humans had defeated them so decisively that surrender was the only option, then no Council force was safe anywhere in the galaxy. What was their message? Zarthek asked, though he suspected he already knew. The humans are offering to negotiate, Vexhai replied. They want to discuss terms for ending the conflict. Admiral Lisa Harper received the Council's request for peace talks aboard the UES Constitution as her fleet prepared for another strike against enemy positions. She had been expecting this message for weeks, ever since human forces had begun operating in Council core systems. The aliens were finally ready to admit that their traditional approach to warfare was not working against humanity. Harper convened a meeting with her senior commanders to discuss the Council's proposal. President Maria Santos participated by secure communication link from Earth, along with other political and military leaders. The question before them was simple. Were humans ready to end the war, or should they continue fighting until the Council was completely destroyed? General Bobby Martinez spoke first from his command center. Our forces have achieved every major objective we set at the beginning of this conflict. We have secured human space, eliminated the Council's ability to threaten our colonies, and demonstrated that humanity cannot be conquered by conventional military force. Captain Michelle Rogers, who had become one of humanity's most successful raiders, disagreed. The Council still has thousands of ships and controls hundreds of worlds. If we accept a negotiated peace now, they might rebuild their forces and attack us again in 10 or 20 years. Admiral Kara Thompson had spent months studying Council psychology and military doctrine. "The aliens are not like us," she said. "They have never fought a war of total destruction because they do not think that way. If we demonstrate that continued fighting will result in their complete annihilation, they will accept any terms necessary to survive." President Santos made the final decision. "We will negotiate with the Council, but only on our terms. They came to us with an ultimatum demanding surrender, and they will leave with a treaty that guarantees human independence forever." The peace conference took place on a neutral world in the border region between human and Council space. Supreme Counselor Zarthek led the alien delegation, accompanied by military advisors and diplomatic experts from all 12 Council species. They expected to negotiate the kind of limited settlement that had ended conflicts throughout galactic history. Instead, they found themselves facing Admiral Harper, General Martinez, and a team of human negotiators who had no interest in compromise. The humans presented their terms with the same directness they had shown throughout the war: complete Council withdrawal from human space, recognition of human sovereignty over their expansion zone, and formal acknowledgement that humanity would police their own territory without Council interference. Councillor Vexhai protested that such terms were unprecedented in galactic diplomacy. "No species has ever demanded complete independence from Council authority," he said. "The established order requires all civilized worlds to accept guidance from more experienced governments." Admiral Harper's response was simple and direct. "The established order no longer applies to humanity. We have demonstrated our ability to defend ourselves and our determination to remain free. You can accept these terms and live in peace with us, or you can continue the war until one side is completely destroyed." The Council delegates spent hours discussing alternatives, trying to find some middle ground that would preserve their authority while ending the conflict. They offered trade agreements, mutual defense pacts, and limited autonomy arrangements. The humans rejected every proposal that included any form of Council oversight or control. Dr. Patricia Lewis, serving as humanity's chief intelligence advisor, at the conference presented evidence of the Council's weakening position throughout the galaxy. Other species had been watching the war closely, and many were beginning to question whether submission to Council authority was truly inevitable. If humanity could win independence through military force, perhaps other species could do the same. The final terms of the treaty were exactly what Admiral Harper had demanded at the beginning of negotiations. The Council would withdraw all forces from human space within 60 days, recognize human sovereignty over their current territory and planned expansion zones, and establish formal diplomatic relations with Earth on the basis of equality rather than hierarchy. Supreme Counselor Zarthek signed the treaty with great reluctance, knowing that it represented the end of 10,000 years of unquestioned Council authority. But he also knew that the alternative was the complete destruction of his civilization at the hands of an enemy that had proven willing to fight total war for their freedom. As the Council fleet began its withdrawal from human space, Commander Tony Lewis filed his final intelligence report on the conflict. The war had lasted only 6 months, but it had changed the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Humanity had won not through superior technology or greater numbers, but through their willingness to pay any price for their independence. Admiral Jake Morrison, now commanding the border patrol fleet that monitored the boundary between human and Council space, watched the last alien ships cross into their own territory. The war was over, but the peace that followed was based on mutual respect rather than submission. The Council had learned that some species could not be conquered, only destroyed, and they had chosen to accept humanity as an equal rather than risk their own extinction. 5 years later, the galaxy was a very different place. The Council still existed, but their authority was no longer absolute. Dozens of species had declared independence and successfully defended their freedom, inspired by humanity's example. The age of unquestioned alien dominance was over, replaced by a new era of independent civilizations that dealt with each other as equals. President Santos, now in her second term, often reflected on the decision that had changed everything. When faced with the Council's ultimatum, humanity could have chosen the safe path of submission and survival. Instead, they had chosen the dangerous path of resistance and freedom, and in doing so, had proved that some principles were worth any sacrifice. The message had spread across the galaxy and could never be forgotten. Humanity had earned their place among the stars not through diplomacy or submission, but through their willingness to fight total war for the right to exist on their own terms. The Council and every other species watching had finally understood why humans called their approach to galactic politics peace through superior firepower, and why freedom, once won, could never be surrendered again.